Hello there, welcome back to Weir Yard. I'm Jenny Kirk and today we're going to be taking a look at the new release of an old model. It's the Hornby L1 that has been reintroduced into the range, and certainly this is an old favourite of mine. I actually bought my original example from the first batch way back, more than 10 years ago. And when I tell you that I bought it from Model Zone, that just gives you an idea of how long this has been. It's been missing from the range for some time now, so it's nice to see that Hornby have reintroduced it for this year. There's two different examples, and actually Hornby have sent for review both of these. But as we go into the review, you'll notice perhaps the reason why. There's some subtle tooling changes which allow Hornby to represent all 100 members of this class that would have otherwise been a footnote to linear locomotives if it wasn't for the fact that the Hornby model came along actually quite unexpectedly, and it really was a good model in its time. But does it still hold up? Well, today we're going to be taking a good close look and seeing whether it does. So before we get on into this review, don't forget to hit that like button and consider subscribing if you've not already done so. It's a free way that you can really help the channel grow. And we've also got a link down below to Patreon where you can help support the channel to keep us making the videos that you want to see. And as always, we've got that affiliate link to help you find the examples of the locomotives featured today from TMC, the Model Centre, at what we believe to be some of the more favourable prices out there on the internet. So come with me and let's take a good look at the Hornby L1. Today's video comes in association with Trainomatic, makers of DCT decoders and accessories that are designed by enthusiasts for enthusiasts. Find the full range available to order now at tramfabriek.co.uk. Additional support comes from...
This is Clark Railworks, and this is what we do. You'll know us from Ellis Clark Trains, and you'll get the same friendly expertise with us too. We've got a huge range of pre-owned model railways from all your favourite manufacturers, and maybe some you hadn't heard of before. It's the place to come for quality. We don't stock substandard models, and everything we sell is fully tested and photographed by model railway experts. No matter whether you model double-O gauge, N, HO or more, we have sought after models from all around the world with new listings added every weekday. Check out what's available now at clarkrailworks.com and don't miss out on your latest loco.
The latest model to arrive for review from Hornby are these L1 tank locomotives, and these have recently been released. Now, the actual model itself is not all new tooled. It was initially released, I think, about 10 or 12 years ago. Now, those original released models did have a couple of issues which were well reported on at the time, and I'm really quite interested to see whether Hornby have been able to fix some of those issues which prevented my L1 certainly, and quite a few other people's, from running particularly well. And my L1 has been sidelined for quite some time as not being my most reliable runner, so I'm really excited to see whether Hornby have been able to fix that. They very kindly sent over both of these examples in the earlier, really quite attractive LNER apple green livery in a very early British Railways example, and the later BR black with the lining, the early crest, and a number in the 67,000 range. Now, the locomotives themselves were designed by Hornby Thompson, and the initial example, number 9300, was released for testing from Darlington Locomotive Works, and the idea was that they wanted a mixed traffic tank locomotive that could effectively be a maid of all works. After extensive testing, some modifications were made, and the initial example started being delivered from very late 1947, but actually only the first three were outshopped in full LNER livery. They kind of appeared right at the point that nationalisation happened, so subsequently there was almost like some confusion. You saw that with some of the other railway companies that were grouped together into the British Railways, that they didn't really quite know what livery to paint them in. So subsequently the locomotives were outshopped in the LNER livery, but with British Railways spelt out on the tanks, and these gained an E in front of what would have been their LNER number. The locomotives themselves were actually pressed into use on some of the London commuter lines, where actually they didn't live up to expectations. The locomotives were prone to premature wear because they were being used on fast accelerating, frequent stopping services, and this really caused them a lot of issues. And unless they were driven quite gingerly by the crews, then it did cause a lot of wear to happen on the motion, and it gained them the nickname cement mixers. They did go through some modifications to try and improve performance and reliability, but they didn't really have any success with that. And these became a little bit of an early casualty as some of the commuter lines were electrified. So the L1s really just got displaced, with the Riddle standard 4MT tank locomotive with the same wheel arrangement, much more successful, starting to appear on the scene. Really, there was no future for the L1s. The writing were on the wall, and they were all withdrawn by 1962 and very quickly scrapped, so none of these actually survive into preservation. And when Hornby announced this model, it was actually quite a surprise because it wasn't a prototype that you would have expected to have seen ready to run at the time. But certainly it's been a welcome addition for those who model the very early British railways scene and gives a little bit of variety to the locomotive fleets. On the back of the box here, we've got some specific information about the locomotive in the box. Entered traffic on the 25th of March 1948. This was one of the batch built at Darlington Works. Some of the other 100 members of the class were built by North British as well, although outwardly there doesn't appear to have been any real differences between them. Goes through its allocations to Stratford and then subsequently to Cambridge, and it was condemned on the 4th of October 1961 and moved to Darlington to be cut up the next day. And that does feel quite quickly, actually, from withdrawal to being at the cutter's torch. I think it was a case of the guy with the acetylene torch probably being warned not to scald himself on the contents of the boiler as he cut it up. Just for completeness, on the back of the box for this one, we've got the same potted history, but we've also got a little bit of information about this specific example. It's interesting that this was actually a North British built locomotive, and this entered service in a BR black livery. This particular example was condemned on the 16th of September 1962 and cut up at Doncaster Works on the 15th of November 1962, lasting a little bit longer than number 9011, but not that much longer after withdrawal. So we've got catalogue number R30360, and I'm going to bring in the other example as well that has arrived for review, and this is R30361. So you can see there both models say they're DCC ready. They contain an 8-pin DCC plug, and we will be doing a full DCC fit towards the latter third of this video, making use of the Trainer-Matic 8-pin decoder. Now we do have an affiliate link down below that takes you to TMC, the Model Centre, where you can find these models available for sale if you like the look of what you see. The box is Hornby's pretty standard box. We've got the outer slipcase revealing the inner plastic clamshell that's in this really quite robust card inner. We've also got some instructions. We'll look at those in a moment, but let's get this model out of the packaging. One of the things that does greet you as you get it out of the packaging is this extra detailing bag, and this includes steps, vacuum hoses, and what appear to be steam heat hoses as well. We've got some drain cocks, and only one coupling plus brake rigging. And the reason I highlight only one coupling is actually the model doesn't have any factory fitted, but it does have NEM pockets front and back on the bogies to take couplings. So I wonder if that's been an oversight at the factory, not putting two in the box. Now I must admit, when I got the other example out of the box, then this too didn't feature two couplings. You only got one with that as well. Now I have gone ahead and fitted some of the extra detail. It's quite easy to do, and it does add a bit to the model in terms of visually. You can see there the drain cocks especially do look good, and unlike a lot of other models, these don't seem to impinge on the movement of the front bogie, so you're not going to have to worry about these catching, unlike some other models where it's an either or sort of thing. In the paperwork that comes with these, we do have some information on maintenance, on where to fit these extra detailing parts, and also DCC fitting. We will come to that later on. But I will draw your attention to this diagram, number 5, where it shows you where to fit the brake rodding, but it talks about these transit brackets. Now, don't worry, these appear to be referring to previous releases of the model where the packaging was different, and these are now no longer fitted, so don't worry about that at all. Your model won't have them, but don't worry, that's perfectly normal. Impressions of the model are pretty good. There's a reasonable weight to it, and I'm actually going to bring in my model of number 67717. This is from the original first releases, and as you can see, it features the pretty lined LNER livery, but with the subsequent renumbering. Now, these locomotives went through, I think, 3 different renumberings in a space of just really a matter of probably no more than a year to 18 months. So here we have the full iteration of different liveries for some of these, plus they also had 3 of them appeared in LNER livery too, which I'm not entirely sure. I couldn't find any, but I don't think there's an LNER version in this particular release, but they have been released previously. I think as part of the initial run they did an LNER version, but as there was only 3 examples and they didn't last long like that, it was considered perhaps a bit of a very niche livery. We're going to concentrate on this new one. First impressions are really quite good. There's no fragile detail, and certainly I have actually handled this out of the box before the review started, just getting to grips with it. And all of the detail does seem to be pretty well put in place. I've not had anything dive for the floor. On the cab roof, we've got these actually sliding posable roof hatches. Now this is the same for both this version and the North British built black one, and you can see there these would have been for additional crew ventilation, and it's nice that these are a posable part. I think it does make them look a lot better than if it had just been moulded detail on the roof, as we've seen with a lot earlier models from the sort of late 1990s period, which would probably have featured them as just moulded on detail. We do have a few detail differences apparent, and I wonder whether this is down to either this being in a later condition or being a North British built one, but it's nice to see that Hornby have actually tooled up for very subtle differences between the two. The first one apparent, if we look on the actual boiler top, you can see here that in front of the safety valves there's like a raised saddle across the top here, and on the LNER liveried one that is not present. Now that is part of the moulding, so I can only conclude that these are some of the subtle differences that have been included between different versions of the model. Everything else between these two does look to be the same. I'm just casting my eye across and I can't really see any other detail that leaps out. We've got 3 washout plugs with a pair plus 1, pair plus 1, and there's also actually quite a nicely realised bracket which would have held the tanks onto the boiler, and that is really nicely picked out. Despite the fact that this is tooling that is around 10 years plus old, it does seem to still be pretty sharp in terms of the detail that comes through. We've got a very subtle rivet line across the top of the boiler. This would have been actually holding the outer cladding together rather than being on the boiler itself, which would be underneath with lagging, probably asbestos underneath. But it really does appear quite nice with the raised banding, and you can see there that the banding on the early British Railways liveried model really is crisp and sharp. We've got a black centre band with the two white bands either side. Now, I can compare that with the initial release, and even though this is a little bit dusty, so that's why it looks slightly more matte, you can see that this too doesn't have that saddle, but the lining is still pretty crisp between the two. So again, really quite nicely realised. The safety valves do kind of mellow over time. You can see there they've gone a slightly darker colour. They are turned metal, and that's exactly as per what safety valves on real steam locomotives do when they get hot, when they get subjected to steam. They do change colour, and I know this from helping my father run his Garrett Road locomotive in the past. Now, what's interesting is that this initial release, I hadn't realised at the time, but the cab roof has been assembled backwards, and it's nice to see that that has been rectified on the newest release. I don't know whether they'd all been assembled like this, but certainly the example that I bought from Model Zone way back in the day, I now realise had a back to front cab roof, so that is certainly definitely a plus point on the newest release. In terms of weight, they feel pretty much the same as what they would have been in the past. Cab windows are flush glazed, and then we've also got these wind deflectors that are fitted. Not one, but two. It's quite an unusual arrangement, and these would just stop the kind of roar of wind over the opening, which would have made it very, very loud in the cab. Again, that's the same as what appears to be on that initial release, and that is the same between this and the BR Black one. What is quite nice is that looking through these windows, you actually get quite a good view into what is perhaps quite a roomy cab. Certainly compared with some other locomotives, there's a very generous amount of space, and it would seem that Edward Thompson was very, very keen to make sure that it was quite comfortable for the crews. The backhead detail is all printed on there. It's actually, I can see it with my bare eyes, but it's not showing up on the screen, but we'll get that with some of the photographic shots. And even though you can't really see it very well unless you go looking, that is a fully detailed backhead in there. And again, that's the same on the BR Black model too. There's a lot of window glass actually. I've never seen this before. The North British built BR livery, you can see there, we've actually got a doorway plugging in the actual cab with a window in, and I've spotted now that that again is another subtle detail difference between this earlier and the late versions. There's actually a completely different cab side there with the large opening having been replaced with this door with glazing in. I really do love being able to compare between the two different versions here and seeing some of these subtle detail differences. The cab front has a very characteristic shape. You can see there some quite large windows in the cab to try and give the crew some decent view. And these, again, flush glazed. I'm just going to compare between the two different versions, and they do look pretty much the same. The green makes it a lot easier to see what's going on there, but definitely some really good glazing. On the back of the bunker, it looks to be that we've got pretty much the same sort of detail between the two. The LNER style lining really does pick out quite a lot of that really, really well. With the rear coupling hook comes factory fitted in the buffer beam, although what I will say is that the front one is included in the detail pack actually with its 3-link coupling intact. We've also got the lamps. You can see there the lamps are actually all picked out with the kind of silvering for the lens, and I'm just interested to see, and yes, it was included but much duller on the initial release. So again, I think it's a much nicer choice of colour that Hornby have gone for with those. The ladder and all of this rear railings are all present. The handrails feel like they're metal, but the ladder is quite a springy plastic. We've got separately applied metal, I think they're lamp irons. Are they lamp irons? Or I'm not quite sure what these are. but they are really quite fine. You can see them there. And then looking further forward, we've got what appear to be additional breathers for, I'm guessing that there was a water tank underneath here, as well as along the sides of these locomotives, which gave them pretty reasonable range. And we've got these little breathers which would allow air in as the water level dropped, and just avoid getting a vacuum in there as the water level goes down. Looking down the other side of this model, both of these have a Westinghouse pump. Some of the pre-grouping railway companies did go for Westinghouse air brakes, and then vacuum braking kind of became the default standard, and a lot of rolling stock and such like was then changed to vacuum braking, and then later on in the late 60s into the 70s we kind of went the other way. So it's interesting to see that we've got the Westinghouse air pumps on these, and again I'm going to compare with the original release, and we've got that Westinghouse air pump on there as well. Now looking across the rest of the model, we've got this little cutout here. It looks a little bit odd on the BR version, but that is as per the prototype, because the lining doesn't actually hook around over the top. I would have thought they would have lined up and over, but instead the lining kind of ends at each end of that opening. But on the LNER version, the lining does actually hump over, which I think actually aesthetically does look a lot nicer. On the LNER green version, you can see it does highlight the detail we've got in there a lot better. And then looking further down, we've got full metal valve gear. That's all a cast metal piece in there. That really is quite nice and robust. And then we've got the Walshot style valve gear on there, and all of the brake blocks are factory fitted, but that brake rigging is left for the end user to apply for themselves. We've got the correct pattern, slightly raked front cylinders, and then looking to the front, we've got the smoke box finished in black. We've got actually an air gap underneath there. That's quite a nice touch, seeing all the way through. And then the actual saddle that the smoke box sits on, there's no gaps underneath there. It really does look quite good. There's a lot of separately fitted detail. And then we've got this really nice printed works plate, so you can just see that there. And I've got every faith that on the close-up that is fully readable and applicable to this specific model. The front face of the locomotive is captured really well. You can see that dished smoke box front. The smokebox dart is a metal separately fitted piece, and then we've got, I think that's plastic. I'm not sure actually. Whatever it's made of, it's very robust. So if it's metal, apologies to Hornby, but that is very robust. But there is a spring to it for the lamp iron, and then we've got additional step there at the front. It really is nicely fitted. It doesn't open. I always think opening smoke boxes, if they don't serve a function, are just a bit of a gimmick. The one on the left doesn't have the number plate on the smokebox door. That is accurate. Instead, it has it painted on the buffer beam. So again, another subtle detail difference between these two different models. You can also see that there's different brackets on the front in keeping between some of the detail differences. In fact, those brackets are on both of them at the back, but only on the Darlington built version on the front. And actually it's a little bit of a work of genius. Hornby have sent these two different models, and actually gives a lot of opportunity to see some of these subtle detail differences between the two. On the BR black liveried version, we've got a shed code of 30A and the SC underneath. That's really quite sharply printed, and I've actually gone ahead as well and added on some of that front buffer beam detail. So you can see there I've got the vacuum standard, the steam heat hose, and these are all push fit. We've got the front coupling on there as well, although the actual example here does seem to want to come undone, but it's not really a great issue. And then we've got the correct shape at the front here with this step down in the running plate, and then the gussets flanged in to give strength to the buffer beam itself. Another detail difference that I've actually just spotted between these two is if you look at the running plate, it's stepped on the North British example, but the Darlington built example has this curved running plate there. So actually it does quite change the look from the front of these models. You can see there a very different shape to the running plate. And one final thing as well is really nice to see is that I drew attention to the Darlington Works plate on the Darlington built example, but we've got the characteristic diamond-shaped North British Works plate on the North British built example. And as far as I can tell, that is all the detail differences that I can spot between these, but it really is subtle but nicely done. The buffers are turned metal heads with actually quite a pleasing spring to them. Not that most people would make use of that in 00, but they are there. I do like the green finished wheels with the white lining do look superb on this particular model. The BR one doesn't feature quite so much. We've just got the black finished wheels. I mean, they're nice in and of themselves, but not as eye-catching as the LNER version. The printing on the model really is quite crisp. You can see the E9011 and the British Railways are really well finished, sharp, and there's no sign of fuzziness. The same applies to the lining. There's extra detail as well, including the route availability, and it really is quite nice. The printing on the BR Black model is equally as good, and you can see here the lining is subtle but well done, and I really do like the BR Cycling Lion logo, as well as the crisp number on the tender. Everything about these models is really well done. Moving further back, we've got the representation of the pipework. These would have been for the injectors. That's finished in a really nice kind of bronzy, coppery colour. And then the rear bogie is actually a very nice piece. That's a metal casting that you can see in there, and it features pickups to all 4 of these wheels, and that means that the model itself features pickups on all 6 of the driving wheels plus the 4 of these wheels, and they don't feel like they're snagging at all on these wheels. They're still fairly free turning, which should mean that we're not going to get any issues with that, but we will be able to enjoy that extra performance. The coupling on this has been fitted by myself there into the moulded in pocket. Now it does mean if you remove these, you're left with a kind of gaping hole. You can see there at the other end. There's not really a lot you can do about that, which is a little bit of a shame. And then I'm going to look at this front bogie. This was an area where the original model had a few issues. Now it does feel like a metal casting. The wheel is really nicely realised there. We've got a full turn metal wheel finished in black. We've got the correct spokes in there, but it has this strange camming mechanism, and when we come to running, I really want to see how this performs. Now, the original version had way too much play, and one of the things it had a habit of doing was crabbing down the track when going forwards, and I didn't really find any way of resolving that. In fact, if I look to that original model, it gave no end of trouble, and you can see it's got far too much forward play. And this created a lot of stress on these 2 little lugs here, and I actually found that this was the Achilles heel of this model running. It didn't run forwards at all well from the initial release, so that is definitely an area where it does feel like there's slightly less movement. It's a little bit more restricted, and I'm hoping that this will return to the centre position after camming on the track to get round curves. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to put this on the DC rolling road, and we're going to see just how well it performs there. Today's video is sponsored by TMC, the Model Centre, your first choice for finding all of the models featured today at the best possible price at the link in the description. TMC also offers custom weathering and renumbering to any model, be it brand new or pre-owned. Check out their full pre-owned listings too, where you can be assured of quality as every item is screened and graded by professional staff. TMC, the Model Centre, your first choice for all aspects of modelling. Running on DC, the model was a little bit lumpy out of the box, but it does recommend running in for around 20 minutes to half an hour in each direction. So I set it off on the rolling road, and actually at high speeds it really was perfect. It's only at that very low speed that the model seemed just a little bit lumpy. That did improve with running, but didn't quite fully go away. So it's something that hopefully the more this locomotive runs, once we DCC fit it, the better it'll get, and we'll reassess this towards the end of the running footage. So we come now to the DCC fitting, and for this I'm going to use the Trainomatic 8-pin decoder, and I've got one in here. We do have a link down below to help you find them at their UK stockists, Tramfabriek, but these we do find to be a good all-rounder, not requiring any CV setups to get the best performance out of most locomotives. To get inside the model, there's just 2 screws to deal with. It's actually a really easy model to DCC fit. First one's here. You can see we've got an access hole in the front bogie, have that centered, and the screwdriver just goes down neatly, and you can feel it engage with the head of that screw. And then there's another one just back here, so you can just see that in front of the rear bogie. I'm going to unscrew that, and then make sure we keep these screws safe. Gently part the locomotive and body. Inside here we've got actually a good deal of weight just down here inside the boiler. There appears to be a metal plug that fits in there quite nicely. The inside of the tanks are completely hollow, and this does mean that if you're wanting to add anything extra in here, then there's plenty of space to do it. The motor itself appears to only take up the central part of the boiler. The actual DCC socket is here at the back, fitting in the bunker. Now there's no speaker pre-fitted into the model, but there is plenty of space for this. If we look up inside the bunker, you can see that there's plenty of room to take a decoder, even a stay alive too, and a small speaker in an enclosure will also fit in there as well. I'm actually going to get a flathead screwdriver just so I can very carefully prise up the blanking plate. So I just work it at both ends a little bit at a time. It's just good practice, and then we can take that out. We've got a little mark there which shows us exactly where pin 1 is, and this matches up on the 8-pin decoder with the orange wire. So if we look on there, you can see the orange wire, and then it's just really easy. Line up, make sure the pins are in the holes, and then slide that down. Make sure that this is all tucked out the way. There's plenty of space in the bunker, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to tuck the decoder down into there, and then as I lift the chassis up, we can just make sure that that trail of wire fits in there just fine. Line the chassis up. Make sure that there's no wires sticking out, getting caught, getting crushed. And then that body's gone all the way down. It's then over to these screws. Tighten that up. Again, don't over tighten these. You don't need to go gung-ho. It doesn't need it. All you'll do is strip the screw and cause an issue for your model. And then down and in for the front screw. Again, slowly tighten it until you feel resistance. You don't need to go beyond that. It doesn't require it. And there we have the model DCC fitted in record time. Plenty of space in this tender. I'd actually go as far as saying that a HM7000 decoder looks like it'll probably fit in there, along with the stay alive and the speaker in probably the small enclosure. May even go into one of the larger enclosures. Definitely there's a reasonable amount of space, and if in doubt, We've also got space in these side tanks too, but actually with those pickups on the trailing bogie, I don't think that this model really is going to particularly need any kind of a stay alive. Out of the box, the decoder is on ID address 3, and what we're going to do is, if we need to, I'm going to put this onto the programming track, and my own preference is first two and last two. But in the case of this number, it's only 4 digits, so this will be 9011. So we'll get that done, and then it's off to the layout to see how well it performs. On the tracks of Weir Yard, the locomotives both performed admirably. On the main tracks, I had both of them in charge of some quite long coach rakes of the Hornby Gresley coaches. Now, these are quite heavy and there are gradients on the main line of Weir Yard, but there was no sign of slipping whatsoever. I did also put to the test my original first batch L1, and that was also equally capable. So it does seem that the pulling power of these locomotives is still as good as it ever was. There's plenty of power in hand. With no sign of slipping, it's clear that these locomotives could have taken on a much bigger load without any issues whatsoever on the 1 and 2% gradients that exist. On the torture test track, the locomotives still managed to get all the way round, but what was noteworthy is that they did have a propensity to get hung up on changes of gradient where the track goes from flat to climbing. It's that initial transition of gradient that there doesn't seem to be quite enough vertical movement in the front and rear ponies, and that can end up with the locomotive spinning its wheels and not going anywhere. Other than that, through point work, there was no issues whatsoever, and it really didn't show any signs of requiring a stay alive. None were fitted and none were needed. I put this down to those extra pickups on the rear bogie, which makes a massive difference on a locomotive of this size. And Hornby have to be commended for this design, which does make these very reliable runners. In terms of the issue that I had noted on my original first batch L1 of the front bogie crabbing when heading around straight track, I didn't see any evidence of this occurring on this new batch. The front bogie still have that slightly strange double cam mechanism, which I'm guessing is supposed to self-center them, but there seems to be a little bit more resistance, so that front bogie tends to stay in that central position a lot easier, and there was no need to run either of these locomotives in reverse because the front bogie caused no issues whatsoever. The actual motor was silky and smooth. They weren't noisy at all, and whilst the green locomotive had a little bit of hesitancy, especially when going down the 5% grade at low power, I'm putting this down to that slight stiff spot when we saw it running on the DC rolling road. The black locomotive actually performed really, really well, so I'm going to say that this is probably a one-off, and it did improve with running. The more I ran the green locomotive, the better it got. So give it a couple of hours on the layout, and I don't really believe this to be an issue at all. So we turn now to the scores, and I just want to remind people that here on the channel, we believe in doing a deductive score rather than an adductive score. And what that actually means is that in each category, a locomotive will start off with full marks and only gets marks removed if we find an issue, rather than adding up from 0. We feel that this is a much fairer way of doing it. So if you think that the scores that I award are all far too high, this is the reason why it's down to the scoring system that I use. First up though is build quality, and actually these locomotives are really nicely solidly put together. I didn't really find any issues. Certainly there was no raining down of small parts out of the box, and even with all the handling there wasn't anything that came off. Although the slides on the roof, whilst a nice feature, did seem to be potentially a little bit flimsy, and I'm a little bit reticent about this because they haven't come off, but there's just that feeling that they might be ever so delicate, so do handle them with a great deal of care. Other than that, there just really isn't anything much to fault, so I'm going to give them a 9.9. So we come next to running quality, and actually I was really impressed with these on the main tracks of Weir Yard. One of the things that I did want to look out for was the issue that I'd had on my original L1 from new with that crabbing front bogie, which, it has to be said, at the time people on Internet Fora were also talking about, and it's pleasing to see that Hornby does seem to have fixed this issue, tightening up the front bogie mechanism to make sure that it didn't crab when going forwards on straight track, so that was really good to see. The pickups on that rear bogie really do add to the reliability of these models, and there was no sign of either of them needing a stay alive. Indeed, the original model, which I had running at the same time, also doesn't have a stay alive in it and doesn't really need it. Now, the green model we noted on the DC rolling road had just a little bit of a tight spot, and this has been gradually improving with all the time I was running it. You can still see it, particularly at slow speed on a downhill grade, but it is getting better and better, and the black model, it must be noted, doesn't exhibit the same issue, so I put this down to maybe a one-off, which is definitely going to improve and probably disappear altogether with a little bit more running. In terms of grip and pulling power, these really do punch above their weight. On the main tracks, I had them handling a 5-coach train of Gresley coaches, and there was no sign of slipping whatsoever. They weren't taxed with that, and it was quite clear that they could have handled more besides. On the Torch test track, however, though, there were a few issues creeping in. They did get round the radius 1 curves with no issue, and it's nice to see that you can have those drain cocks fitted without them fouling the front bogie whilst it's doing this. It also got through double slips and complex curves and the twisted track work. Where it did have a little bit of Achilles heel, though, was in changes of gradient between flat and uphill. On those occasions, the model did have a propensity to get hung up between the front pony truck and the rear bogie and leave it with its wheels spinning. And this is something that I would put down to not enough vertical travel on the front pony and rear bogie, which allows it to beach itself in this way. But other than that, there were no great issues, and I'm going to give it an 8.9. Next up, we come to DCC fitting and innovation. Well, I'm going to break that down into two parts. First part, DCC fitting, and on this front the models really were a doddle. Just 2 screws to access and the whole body comes off, revealing that chassis and the 8-pin socket in the bunker. There is a lot of room in that bunker, and I don't see any great issue with getting a decoder in there with a speaker. And certainly if you want anything extra, there's plenty of room in those big side tanks as well. It really is one of the easier locomotives to DCC fit. But on innovation, it has to be remembered that this is a 10 or 12-year-old model. Back in that point in time, we didn't have factory-fitted speakers, we didn't have firebox flicker, and it's certainly a locomotive that punched above its weight when it was new, but it has to be remembered that this is a model that's been around just a little bit. It still is very good, and there's no calls from me to do any kind of retooling, but you just need to keep that in mind when we talk about innovation. This is definitely a model from 10 years ago, and the insides and underneath the bonnet does tend to show that, but nonetheless I do feel that this is a great model. I'm going to give it an 8.0. On accuracy and quality of finish, there really wasn't anything I could fault. What I really like about these is the subtleties between the 2 locomotives that Hornby sent. One of them is the North British built example and the other is the Doncaster built example. And what hasn't been made apparent is that there are some really quite noticeable detail differences between the 2 when you have them side by side. I like the fact that we've got correctly represented the curved running plate on the green example and the stepped one on the black. We've also got that extra saddle on top of the boiler in front of the safety valves, And then finally as well, we've got the differences between the two cab doors. These were the subtle differences that I could spot. And there may well be more, but it's really great to see that actually this isn't just one model. There's two subtly different models here, and it's great to see that this has been done. There's nothing else I can fault with the application of the livery, and what's apparent is that we've got a wealth of backhead detail in there, even though we can't see this unless you go really hunting for it with a bright light. And all in all, I'm going to give this the full 10 out of 10. Next up is value for money, and we do have an affiliate link in the description box which takes you to TMC the Model Centre, where both of the models featured in today's video can be had for the discounted price of £179.99. Now, whilst this does seem to be a little bit at the expensive end of the scale for a model of this type, you do get quite a lot of model for your money, and it is a very nice piece of kit. With the detailed differences between both of these, which are quite subtle but there, it really is nice to see the care and attention that went into this model's production somewhere in the region of 10 years ago. But that's where the catch is. This is tooling that you might have expected to have been amortized by now, and certainly my original example cost probably a third of that when I bought it new from Model Zone. But that is par for the course in a way, but it does still feel to be a little bit at the expensive end for the model that you get, and I'm going to give it a 7.5, and that gives us a final overall score of 44.4. Don't forget, as always, to like, share and subscribe. It's a free way of helping the channel and getting some of these videos out there in front of the eyes that need to see them, making the decisions on what to buy for model locomotive fleets up and down the country. And I'd love to hear from you in the comments section down below. What did you think of this model? Certainly from my point of view, I've had one of these for well over a decade, and even though it suffered from some of the issues that the model had when it was first released, it was pleasing to note that Hornby does seem to have addressed the major flaw, which was that crabbing front pony truck. I was also really impressed by the fact that there's some really quite subtle tooling differences that allow both the Darlington-built and the North British-built locomotives to be modelled. I never actually realised this from the first batch, as I had a model of one of the Darlington examples, and maybe that explains why Hornby very kindly sent two different locomotives of the same class for us to review here on the channel. Now, going forward, I have to admit that I do quite like these reruns of old classics. There's sometimes this drive for everything must be new tooled, new tooled, new tooled, and actually there are a lot of models in a lot of manufacturers' ranges which really do deserve more releases, if only because there's a lot of modelers might want to have more than one member of a class on their layout and don't really want to do any renumbering or refinishing of their own. Certainly I'm very much in that camp. Added to that original locomotive from way back when that I bought from the shelves of Model Zone on one of their Christmas shelves long time ago, these really do make a great fleet, and performing much better than their full-sized counterparts. Whilst the prototype of 100-strong locomotives may no longer be with us, the Hornby model does provide for some interesting variety into our model locomotive fleets. But do leave a comment, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Of course, if you spot anything in the review that you think I've missed or overlooked, it's a really good way of sharing this information and your knowledge with your fellow modeler and allowing them to make a good, reasoned choice on whether this is the locomotive for them. But until next time, this is me, Jenny Kirk, saying you take great care of yourself. Happy modelling. Bye for now. Today's video comes in association with Trainomatic, makers of DCT decoders and accessories that are designed by enthusiasts for enthusiasts. Find the full range available to order now at tramfabriek.co.uk. Additional support is provided by...
This is Clark Railworks, and this is what we do. You'll know us from Ellis Clark Trains, and you'll get the same friendly expertise with us too. We've got a huge range of pre-owned model railways from all your favourite manufacturers, and maybe some you hadn't heard of before. It's the place to come for quality. We don't stock substandard models, and everything we sell is fully tested and photographed by model railway experts. No matter whether you model double O gauge, N, HO or more, we have sought after models from all around the world with new listings added every weekday. Check out what's available now at clarkrailworks.com and don't miss out on your latest loco.
Today's video is sponsored by TMC, the Model Centre, your first choice for finding all of the models featured today at the best possible price at the link in the description. TMC also offers custom weathering and renumbering to any model, be it brand new or pre-owned. Check out their full pre-owned listings too, where you can be assured of quality as every item is screened and graded by professional staff. TMC, the Model Centre, your first choice for all aspects of modelling. I'd like to thank everybody over on Patreon, and an extra special huge thanks goes out to our Patreon heroes. Without you guys over on Patreon, we really wouldn't be able to keep making the video content that you see on this channel. And don't forget that you can also head on over to patreon.com/Jennifer Kirk and check out the different tiers of rewards. Thank you so much. You are absolute legends.